Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Johanna Newman, and I'm the Senior Director of Environment America Research and Policy Center's campaign for 100% renewable energy. Environment America Research and Policy Center is co-hosting today's webinar alongside the Texas Solar Energy Society. At Environment America, our mission is relatively simple: to protect the natural world. We envision a better, greener America, one that protects and restores more places where we can all live and thrive, and that offers us and our children the opportunity to live healthier and more enriching lives. I am delighted to moderate today's event. Our plan is to have three panelists joining us. The first is Reverend Richard Nash, who is the senior leader of the pastoral staff at True Life Fellowship in Texas. Louis Petrick, the CEO of Longhorn Solar, who worked with Richard and New Life on their solar array. And then also Dub Taylor, who's the CEO of the Texas Pace Authority. And so here's the format for today's event. I'll make some brief opening comments, and then we will go to our panel. Each of them will speak for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. To ask a question, I ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom recording, which can be found at the, in the toolbar at the bottom. So before we get to our panel, I wanted to just provide a little bit of context. And there are three key points that I want to make. The first is that America has solar energy potential in spades. We could power our country many times over solely by using the energy and the rays of the sun that shine down on us every day. The second point that I want to make is that rooftop solar in particular warrants a special place in our energy future. Rooftop solar is a very efficient way to get energy. We produce it on the roof, we use it in the building, it reduces the need for costly and environmentally destructive transmission lines, and it protects open space because you're putting the panels where we've already built, as opposed to putting it in undisturbed desert or other ecologically sensitive areas. And then lastly, rooftop solar warrants a special place in our energy future because it can help our communities become more resilient. When you couple rooftop solar panels with solar batteries, they can provide power even when the grid is down. So that's my second point. Rooftop solar warrants a special place in our energy future. And then thirdly, churches and other houses of worship are perfect places for solar panels. They make a lot of sense because during the week, these buildings can often see little use, and that can generate a lot of power that can go into the grid and help power the lives of people in the community. And then on Sundays and on other holy days and days of worship, there's all this clean, renewable electricity to power the building. And Louis will go into this more, but now is a perfect time for houses of worship as well as everyday citizens to think about going solar, because there are new federal tax credits that just make it more affordable for churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship to go solar. It's the first time that these tax credits are available for nonprofit, faith-based communities. So that's why I'm so excited for today's discussion. We'll be taking a deep dive into one case study in Texas that has national implications. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to our first panelist, the Reverend Richard Nash. Richard, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and to share. I'd like to share a little bit of my story and background. About 20 years ago, I did some research in energy efficiency and started a company called Integrity Energy Systems. We worked with the Austin Energy Company and gave rebates on different things that they did. I started out by spraying liquid aluminum foil on the underside of retrofit homes, and that made a difference. And then we moved into doing whole house energy audits. and looking at everything they did. Then I sent one of my employees to get certified in California in solar and wind. And so I've been sold on solar for a number of years. And then Lewis was a part of our church, and we talked quite a bit and chose to go solar for our church as well as my own home. And we are so glad that we did that. Two reasons. One, it saves money, which is always good. But two, it sends a message that we care about the environment. We were the first church in Round Rock to go solar, and our newspaper had a big article about it, our local newspaper, and the headlines were perfect. It said, "True Life is looking to the heavens for their power." And I could not think of a better headlines for that, because that's true in so many, many ways. But the point is, us going solar was not just a snap decision. It was something that I had researched for probably 15 years and looked at different possibilities. And so we made a decision not based upon a whim, but based upon solid evidence and really looking at long term. So that's my story, and just wanted y'all to be aware that, again, it was not just a snap decision, but it was a decision based upon years of research.
Great. I look forward to hearing you talk a little bit more about the array and what it does for your congregation and the benefits you see. So we'll get to that in the discussion part. But Lewis, thank you for joining us on today's panel. For those who don't know, Lewis Petrick is the CEO of Longhorn Solar. Yeah, please take it away.
Oh, thank you for having me. So, yeah, we've been, tell you a little bit about Longhorn first. We have been in the solar industry. Well, we've been in the service industry for 29 years now, but we added solar to our product mix about 14. We're coming up on 14 years in June. So it doesn't sound like a long time for a business, but in solar, we're considered old dogs in Texas. We're one of the oldest Texas-based solar companies, and we operate all up and down the I-35 corridor, all the way to Dallas and down to San Antonio. So we were excited about putting the solar on top of True Life, because just like Richard said, I mean, it makes perfect sense. He has a really good southern facing and western facing roof for the solar, and as y'all saw on the picture when everybody was kind of waiting and everything, that was the church, a picture of the church in the background, so y'all can see. Joanna, did you want me to go into the tax credits right now, or go talk about that later?
I think it'd be great if you were ready to talk about it now, I think it makes sense to talk about it now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, some of the exciting things that just happened, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed last year has $369 billion worth of tax credits that are available to all kinds of renewable energies, energy efficiency, cars, everything. But a part of it specifically calls out that nonprofits, so houses of worship, qualify as a nonprofit. For so many years, nonprofits really they weren't able to take advantage of the tax credits because a nonprofit doesn't pay any taxes. So that 30% federal tax credit that everybody else had access to, nonprofits really didn't have an opportunity to take advantage of that. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, that allows nonprofits now to take advantage of the 30% federal tax credit in a refundable tax credit. So at the end of the year, when they file their paperwork, then the government's basically going to send them a check for the 30% of the cost of the system. And on top of that, there are additional adders that any entity could qualify for. not just nonprofits, but one of them is a 10% adder, so go to 40% if they use domestic content. Now, the U.S. Treasury
And
just
Louis, I
came
think
out.
you have some slides prepared. Would it be helpful to have those up at this point, or?
Do you have those? I mean, I need to. I would have to.
I think Maren was planning on putting them up, who is on
Yeah,
our back end.
there we go.
Great.
Awesome.
Is this the one that you're
Yeah.
describing?
Yeah,
Great.
definitely. So, and pay attention to column 2023, so we don't have to go all the way across. But there's, the one that I was talking about is the domestic content, which is the first one under there, which is an additional 10%. Now, the U.S. Treasury just came out with guidance on that on Friday, actually. It's brand new, so we're still interpreting it, but it looks like domestic content means that 40% of the project material cost has to be domestically made. So unfortunately, at this point, there's not a panel manufacturer that uses 100%. All their products are domestically made. So, but that's coming in the near future. I know Q-Cells is one of the manufacturers that is moving towards 100% of their product, including the cells, being made in the United States. So that's another advantage that the IRA has done, is it's encouraged a lot of manufacturing to come back to the United States, whereas most of the stuff was made in Asia and shipped over to the United States. This is really pushing a lot of manufacturing and a lot of jobs being created through manufacturing. But that tax credit, it might be another year or two before we can start seeing that 10% one with domestic content. One of the other ones is a bonus 10% if you live in an energy community, which these are considered areas that have they've been used for oil and gas production in the past, and there are several of those in Texas. From what I've seen, Texas and West Virginia probably have the most energy communities that would qualify for that additional 10%. And then there's also some low income adders also. So you can get an additional 10% if the entity is deemed to be in a low income area. So there's a map that they just came out with, I think actually in the last 2 weeks. So a lot of this stuff is being interpreted right now as we speak. So I mean, it's almost like drinking from a water hose, trying to take in all this information and everything and decipher it and figure it all out. But there's a map that shows, if you are in a low income area, that we can look at and see if you qualify for that additional 10%. And then you could qualify for a 20% if it's deemed to be a low income residential building. So that would be an apartment complex or a HUD housing or something like that. So churches don't necessarily, they're not going to qualify for that additional 20%. But so you can see these things add up. It's not like you have to choose one or the other. I mean, so for churches, I would think that, all of them are going to get the 30%. There's a very high probability there's some in Texas that are going to get the additional 10%. So it would be 40%. And then if they're in a low income community, then that area could get another 10%. So you could see a church getting pretty much 50% in a refundable tax credit of the cost of the system. So the other thing that I like to point out about churches is kind of something that Johanna was talking about, was most of the time when it's on churches, it's highly visible. And, and that's one of the things that we've seen in doing solar anywhere, is the more visible the array, the more it becomes accepted, the more that people are like, hey, wait a minute, maybe this stuff actually works. I mean, or they don't really understand how a panel up on a roof can create electricity. But then they see it in their church, and it's like all of a sudden it's like increases that curiosity. So you end up getting the congregation now starts asking questions. through doing True Life and everything, we had several of the parishioners that came up and basically were just like, hey, how does this actually work? And what do we need to do? And is the proposal free? And, and they start asking a whole lot of questions that they just normally wouldn't have asked and everything. So that's why we like doing houses of worship, because it increases that curiosity and makes people really want to know more about it and find out more information. So I think that's pretty much all I had on this.
Louis,
Is there anything
thank
y'all
you
wanted
so
to add?
much for sharing. It's interesting, at Environment America Research and Policy Center, we do a lot of advocacy around solar. And one of the things that we've seen is that it's been documented in the literature as the neighbor effect, that the greatest predictor of where a house will go solar next is whether another neighborhood or whether another house in that neighborhood has gone solar, because neighbors talk, you share experiences, that it activates that curiosity. And then once people wrap their head around rooftop solar, they can imagine it in their own lives as well.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing too is, God taught us to take care of the planet. I mean, that's one of the things that, that's throughout the Bible. I mean, it pretty much talks about, that we have to take care of our house, so of our planet. So, I mean, it just makes sense from houses of worship to actually explore this and everything, and be leading the flock, if you will, as far as going solar.
Thank you so much for your comments. I'd next love to hand it over to Dub Taylor, who's the CEO, I believe, right, Dub, of the Texas PACE Authority. So if you could start just explaining a little bit about what PACE is and how it relates to solar on houses of worship, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Thanks, Johanna. Yeah, minor correction, Chief Operating Officer of Texas PACE Authority, but the three, you were close. Those three letters are often transposed. So yes, Dub Taylor, I'm with Texas PACE Authority, been with the organization for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I had committed almost 3 decades to public service with the state of Texas, running various energy efficiency, water conservation programs designed for public sector entities, so cities and schools and et cetera. So PACE is a financing structure, and PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And the key to it is that it provides for longer term financing for energy and water savings projects and distributed generation projects like solar that have high capital costs but longer term paybacks. There's often a disconnect where if a property owner decides, I want to replace the HVAC or lighting or put solar on the roof, that requires a significant investment up front, and then the payoff is over a longer term. So overcoming that capital hurdle is a disincentive and prevents a lot of these good projects from moving forward. So what the PACE financing structure does is it uses a local government assessment mechanism to provide security for private financing for privately owned projects, where a lender ordinarily probably would not extend a loan term as long as needed to match the benefits from the project. So the common structure in Texas, our model is similar to other states. There are 30 states that have enabled PACE programs or PACE legislation. Texas established its PACE legislation 10 years ago, and it's been a gradual build, and we've got a lot of activity now. But the common features, as I mentioned, are that there is a local assessment. This is voluntary. So the owner says, local government, we will accept an assessment lien on our property that serves sort of like a mortgage to secure the long-term financing of the equipment. And that then means that private lenders, third-party lenders, again, instead of making, say, a 5 or a 6-year equipment loan, will make a 20 or a 25-year equipment loan, so that for the owner, the projects cash flow. So this can be 100% financing. Oftentimes, again, an equipment loan may require some down payment, but with the local assessment lien providing security, that's not required for PACE financing. And again, the design of the program is for it to be cash flow positive for the owner day one and throughout the life of the project. In Texas and elsewhere, distributed generation projects, that's any sort of power that is on the customer side of the meter, typically qualifies. We have had a number of projects in Texas where solar has been used either as the entire project. And in fact, there's one church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that it was a relatively new building, so they did not need to upgrade their lighting or HVAC or other things, but they were interested in having solar, and so they utilized PACE to finance the solar array on the roof. There's another church in Houston more recently that was in a much older building. They had 20-year-old mechanical systems that not only underperformed, and in a place like Houston, obviously you've got temperature and moisture control issues that you have to deal with. And if those systems aren't performing, that means, you know, when the congregation is there and the facility is packed, you have it can be pretty uncomfortable. And then also in places like Houston, where there's high levels of moisture in the air, you can unintentionally, you know, develop mold and create air quality and health risks in the environment inside the building. So they were able there to address those needs for the facility, as well as add solar through a comprehensive program financed through PACE. So if you think about PACE, and if you're familiar at all, if you've heard the term public improvement district, this would be where say business owners in a downtown area come together and say, we would like to see Main Street improved, new lighting, benches, whatever it may be, replacing bricks in historic downtowns. And we're willing to help pay for this through a voluntary assessment on our property. That's the way PACE works, but instead of having a group of property owners come together and propose that to a city, it's a one-by-one property owner. So it's sort of like a one property public improvement district. These projects have been very successful with solar. Honestly, you know, until really 4 or 5 years ago, it was very challenging because of the relatively low energy costs and electricity rates in Texas for solar to pencil out financially in many cases. That has changed. Our power has gotten much more expensive in Texas and will increasingly become so. There are a number of fixed costs that are being spread to all ratepayers. It'll be recovered over the next 10 or 20 years. That means that the value of solar in distributing or producing as much power as you can on site will be even that much more beneficial going forward. And that's the case nationwide. You know, energy costs are going up. And the associated costs of maintaining the electric grid and the infrastructure are going up. So to the extent that you can avoid purchasing that higher cost power and provide that yourself, controlling your own destiny, that's going to make much more sense going forward, even compared to today.
Great. Thank you so much, Dub. All right, with that, it was so fascinating to hear all of your prepared comments. Really appreciate it. We have a couple of questions. The first is a little bit of a logistical question. So yes, we will make a recording of this webinar available on the Environment America Research and Policy Center website. I can also make sure that the PTC under IRA document that we were looking at while Lewis was speaking is included in that resource. And then I will, within the next 48 hours, email that recording and the supporting documents out to everyone who RSVP'd for today's webinar so that you have it in your inbox and can share it as needed. And then, so that's logistics. There's a good question here about whether there are limits for tax credits or rebates for the nonprofits. So Louis, this might be best fielded by you, maybe distinguishing the rebates from the nonprofits and explaining what, if any, limits are in place.
So as far as the federal tax credits, there aren't any limits on that. There are some areas that provide additional incentives. Austin Energy is one of those that does provide an additional incentive to help pay for the solar system. And then CPS Energy in San Antonio is another one that offers additional rebates to help pay for the solar system. As far as I know, the only other one, Encore, does have a rebate as long as a battery is included in the system. So, but those are really the only three that I know of that are going to provide additional monies to a project. So.
Great. There's another question here from Linda, and it's possible that this is geographically limited, so we might need Linda to tell us where she's from, but she's learned that in her parish, they are interested in doing an energy audit of the building to learn where money can be saved and whether solar might be an option. And she asked, how do I advise them to proceed? Does anyone want to take that? Richard, maybe from your experience actually being in those shoes, it'd be good to hear.
Sure. I think that's very important before anything is done, is to have an energy audit to find out where your needs are. One of the things we were so appreciative of Lewis's team, when they came in, they basically said, you know, your thermostats are really a mess. And so they replaced all of our thermostats and showed us how to set them to the most optimum way. So like I said, when I worked with Integrity Energy, the first thing we would do would be to do an energy audit. And I would do that before you made any decisions at all.
Great. So you're saying start with the audit, reduce your
Yes.
energy use on the front end so that you can get a system that's right sized for the future. Yep.
Exactly, because solar may not be the only answer. You may have a ventilation problem. You may have a number of other problems. And so just doing solar is good, but you really need to do just an overall energy audit. And I would make sure you did it with someone who's actually certified, as opposed to someone who only sells a certain thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If I could add to that, I completely agree with everything Richard said. And someone qualified and certified that knows what they're doing is important. One initial resource, and we've found this in many cases, is oftentimes there is a member of the congregation that has a background in engineering, mechanical engineering, possibly, and they can help with some of those first steps. And maybe even if there's a facilities committee or a finance committee that is looking at these issues, that could be a great resource that maybe has been untapped to get things started. And then they can help define, what the needs are and how to ensure that a quality energy audit is being performed, et cetera. So oftentimes those resources are right there, but they've been overlooked.
Great.
One other thing I'd like to add to that is we actually had a couple of different bids come in to look at the different things that they would do. And so just as far as being wise, I think it's helpful to get a couple of different opinions, just like you do with the doctor. You don't automatically take the first doctor's opinion. So I think that that's also wise. You might spend a little bit up front, but in the long run, you really will save.
Great. There are a couple of tax related questions. So I don't think anyone here is a tax expert, but if you feel like you can answer these, great. The first is, how do the feds distribute money to nonprofits since nonprofits don't pay taxes? And then the second question in this vein is, churches are exempt from information filing that other nonprofits are required to do. And so is that filing required to obtain access to the credit, and what information might be available here? And again, I recognize this is the first year these credits have been in place. And so I'm curious what, if anything, the panelists know about that.
Honestly, this is all it's all brand new. And we are in the process of seeking guidance from professional entities that can give us more guidance on that ourselves. So I think that, really you probably need to be checking with a tax professional that can explain this a little bit better. But yeah, it's there's so much information right now on all of the different incentives and everything. It's like we're just trying to take it in as fast as we possibly can. But I definitely recommend talking to a tax professional before making any kind of commitment to buy something.
Great.
And I think the key change, Lewis, and you mentioned the Treasury guidance, the ink is still drying on the Treasury guidance that has even been released, and then there's still more to come. But the key change is that, to the questions to the questioner's point, if you don't have a tax liability, a tax credit doesn't help you. But now what's happened is that tax credit can be converted to a rebate, essentially a check or dollars that can be made available to a tax exempt entity. And that's really the key shift here. And again, the guidance is still being developed. And as far as, I think, the related question on public disclosure, transparency, I don't know. That would be a tax professional's opinion. There may be something that is required, for public disclosure to access those dollars, but I don't know the limit of that or how deep that would go.
Great. Thank you so much. There are questions about the sizing of the system. So there's a question around, rather than optimizing the size of the system, this particular person is thinking about doing a smaller solar system at the church to test it and see how it works. And that would be a lower upfront cost and ultimately a smaller footprint on their grounds, because their roof, for one reason or another, architectural features, doesn't accommodate solar. So how hard is it to add more solar after the first installation? And yeah, what are our panelists' thoughts on this?
So, I mean, you can come back and add solar at a later time. You start with one size and then come back, as long as you've got enough roof space, or a lot of churches are putting it, they've got land out beside the church or something, and they can put a ground mount instead. A ground mount is another highly visible place to be putting solar if your roof isn't compatible. And that is, speaking of that, that is one of the things that you want to take a look at, is how old is the roof? If a roof in Texas is, gonna last anywhere from 15 to 20 years. So if that roof is over 10 years old, you may really want to be looking at possibly getting the roof replaced before you put a solar system on it. So it's one of the very first things that we look at, is the age of the roof. But we have another church that they only put a 10 kilowatt system and offset about 25% of their electricity. and have been very happy with it because, again, any energy that you're creating from the sun is better than nothing. So, it's really, how much do you want to do? How much can you do? So,
Yep, great. Related question, do solar systems over parking lots make sense? I'll share from Environment America's perspective. We absolutely think it makes sense. Solar on the built environment, it can sometimes be more costly than putting it on pre-existing structures. But Louis, or if anyone else has experiences with parking lot solar, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
we haven't installed any on parking lots. We bid a couple of them. I mean, we were one of the companies that bid the solar system that's on Dell Technologies campus and everything. Unfortunately, we didn't get that one, but it is interesting. I mean, I think we're going to see more and more solar going on top of parking lots because it's an unused resource that, again, gives you distributed generation. And interestingly, the country of France has mandated that every parking lot with above, I think it's 50 parking spaces, has to put a parking lot covered solar system in within a certain time frame too. So that was something that they just passed this, I think, end of the last year or beginning of this year was when that passed. So I think that we're going to see more and more of that coming on, especially in the much larger parking lots. I mean, I would expect that you're going to see, I think I've seen a couple nationally that have been done. I can't remember if it was it IKEA or, I mean, IKEA puts solar on almost every one of their buildings. I think that they probably would be ones that would be looking at it, or if it was a Walmart. But I think I've seen some pretty large parking lot covered solar systems going in. And I think as we go forward, especially when you see more of that, costs come down. So it is a little bit more expensive to do upfront. But I think that, like I said, as time goes on, I think we're going to see prices come down on some of the structures and everything. And you're going to, especially as more electric vehicles come out, because what you see a lot with the parking lot covered solar systems is electric car chargers being built into those systems. So it's just going to be a much better way to add electric car charging to those parking lots also.
Great. Thanks, Louis. We have a couple of questions about net metering. So is net metering available in Texas? Is that part of the equation of solar penciling out? Yeah, so that's the question. Anyone want to briefly explain what net metering is and where it's available and whether it's available in Texas? And if so, what the rates are?
So Texas is a little bit unique in the way that we handle net metering. It is up to each entity as to how they do net metering. So in Texas, we have ERCOT controls, I think something like 80 or 90% of the grid. And with that, they allow retail energy providers to, and that's who you pay for your electricity, to come up with their own plans for net metering. So, and what net metering is basically, when the sun hits the solar panels, they generate electricity. It flows down to your breaker panel. It's going to feed all the loads in the building first, and any excess electricity will flow back out onto the grid. So that excess electricity that flows out on the grid, is the electricity provider paying you for that energy, and how much are they paying you? So going back to ERCOT and the retail energy providers, you have to find a retail energy provider that's going to provide you the best, the largest payback, or the best payback. So, yeah, it really, in those areas, you have to find that. Now, there are other areas that fall outside of ERCOT, like municipalities and Austin Energy, Georgetown Utility, CPS in San Antonio. Those have their own net metering plans, and they have, I mean, Austin Energy uses a net metering plan called Value of Solar, where they just basically pay you for the solar that that you produce. So you get a credit for every kWh that you produce. You get a certain amount of money for that, and it just gets credited to your bill. So it's not a net metering plan. It's a kind of a hybrid of that. So you just have to get with your utility and find out. Co-ops have their own plans also. Some are good, some are not so good. So you really just need to check with your provider to find out how they compensate for the energy, and if they compensate for the energy.
And then bottom line, Louis, when you factor in the tax credits plus this net metering rubric, like, would you say it's a true statement that at this point, no matter where you are, if you can put solar on, you will save money, and it's just a matter of, you know, is it a 5-year payback or a 7-year payback or an 8-year payback?
You know, what we're seeing is that a lot of it depends on the building. I mean, are you southern exposure, which is going to be the best? Most solar is going to be produced if it's facing south. West typically is the next best, and east the least. Most of the time, you don't want to put it on the north. So you're going to get your best payback. That what we've found is what the solar tax credits for churches does is it basically levels a playing field. So you're going to get about the same as what a residential solar system would do as far as the offset goes. In Texas, the electricity prices, as Dub said, have gone up quite a bit, but we still haven't got down to that 7 and 8 year. I mean, most of the time, I think that we're seeing closer to 9 to 12 years as a typical ROI. But that's kind of the beauty of churches too, is, you know, they're thinking long term. You know, I mean, it's their time horizon for a return on investment. It's not, whereas a homeowner, almost always the primary consideration is saving money. With a house of worship or a church, a lot of times that's one of the factors, but it's not the most important. And a lot of times it's just about the environment and there's a whole lot more social and governance kind of equation, not necessarily as much like I said, the ROI. And I'll tell you, I mean,
And
before,
if the return on investment is a huge factor, then PACE financing offers an avenue to make that investment for the long haul.
To fill that gap, and we see incentives and rebates paired with PACE financing all the time. The rebate or a tax credit or a rebate in lieu of a tax credit would be like the owner or the church contributing their own money to buy down the cost of the project, and then PACE financing could finance the balance of the system.
Great. There are 2 questions here that I would be interested to hear your thoughts on. The first is a question from Lou, whose church is approximately 100 years old and has an old slate roof. And he's just wondering whether that's a complete non-starter, because odds are there is there's attachment to that old slate roof.
yeah, we don't
Louis,
see
put solar on slate.
we don't. Yeah, we won't touch a slate roof. I mean, we don't really see a whole lot of slate roofs in Texas. Those are more, a lot of times you're going to see those more up north. I mean, I would wonder where I've heard that solar makes a lot of sense on a slate roof is solar shingles, because the cost of a slate roof is so much to replace and everything. So when you're looking at replacing a slate roof, and and again, we don't install those, but there are companies out there that do provide solar shingles. And when you start looking at replacing a slate roof, it is definitely less expensive to do a solar shingle type roof that looks almost identical to the slate. So
there are two more questions about the tax credits in particular. So the first one from Tom is, does the investment tax credit apply to battery storage? And my understanding with that is yes, it does.
yes, batteries are included in the tax credits.
And do they have similar provisions in terms of the 30% credit and a domestic manufacturing and an energy community? Does that apply to batteries as well?
Yes, as far as I know, all that is included. You know, what's funny is batteries. For those of you that live in Texas, all of you know about Winter Storm Uri, and prior to that storm, I mean, batteries. No, we weren't selling any batteries in Texas, but post storm, I would say that we're up around, just our company in general is up around 30 to 40% of our customers now are putting batteries on with their solar systems. And I'm expecting that we're going to see that on the commercial side as we go forward too. You know, the Texas legislature is talking about some things that to help incentivize batteries too, where they can all kind of work together. And in times of, you know, everybody in Texas, we get these notices where conserve energy. Well, you know, all of the batteries that are being deployed in Texas, if they were used right, could actually be deployed in those times of peak demand and help make, you know, just basically reinforce the grid. So the opportunities for batteries are massive. It's just really everybody's just trying to put their head around how do we aggregate them and how do we utilize them to best benefit the grid. And I think that over the coming years, you're going to see more and more of batteries being used to just basically help the grid become better. I mean, they're even talking about cars now. I mean, I have an F-150, and that truck is the equivalent of 4 Tesla Powerwalls. So if they could find a way for cars to plug into the grid and utilize those batteries, I mean, it's just the opportunities for batteries are endless. So
we would,
Great.
I would add to that, every PACE project that we have seen come in that has solar considered as part of the scope, the owner also wants to see how batteries or storage could be part of the project as well. And I think there may have been a lack of understanding or a misunderstanding prior to Winter Storm Uri when we lost power around the state. I think some people that had solar assumed I've got solar, I'll be fine, and they didn't realize that the nature for safety purposes, the way that solar arrays are wired into the system, that they need a signal from the power grid to operate. But if you have a battery that's a buffer in between, then you have some ride-through capability in the event of an outage. And so there's some awareness there. And the battery technology has advanced pretty quickly, and the cost curve it's coming down the cost curve pretty quickly as well.
Great. And then there's a question in the chat from Cindy about how the solar industry is making progress towards increasing domestic production. What's the status of domestic battery production? I don't know if any of you all know that offhand. I imagine the Inflation Reduction Act sends a signal to domestic battery production to encourage it the same way that it sent a signal to solar. But Louis, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Tesla is making and has been making batteries in the United States for several years. And from what I'm hearing, they're being made in Austin now also. So you're starting to see more and more battery manufacturers making the batteries. And So the batteries are being made here, but are all the components being made here? And that's where the Inflation Reduction Act is really increasing the manufacturing, it bringing it to the United States, because for instance, again, Tesla just announced that they're going to be getting most of their materials in the United States, one of them in Texas and another one in Nevada. So they're really stepping up and bringing in most of the materials that go into the battery being made in the United States also, not just bringing in all the components out from overseas. And that's kind of what happens with solar panels. A lot of the solar panels are assembled in the United States, but most, and I wouldn't say a lot of the components come from Asia, and that's where the Inflation Reduction Act is really helping out, because a lot of the components are going to be made in the United States now also. So that's what's coming.
Great. So Richard, you talked about the reasons why your congregation went solar: to save money, to protect the environment. There's a question here about the aesthetics. So, David essentially writes that a number of the church members are seniors and are just averse to the structure of the church changing in appearance. And so understanding your statement, Richard, about churches taking the lead and, igniting curiosity, did you have any instances where people had adverse reaction to the solar panels? And if so, what were those, and how did you address people's concerns about appearance?
That's a great question. We actually did not have any negative comments. We had several positive comments about it, because it really does send a message. And yes, it may not enhance the look of your place, but in the long run, that's not really that big of a deal. It's just not. Maybe for a really old congregation with an old building, it really might be, but the benefits far outweigh any possible detraction of the looks of the facility.
Great. Thank you, Richard. And we're about 5 minutes to our deadline on this. I want to thank Dub Taylor for joining us from the Texas PACE Authority. He needs to drop off a little bit early. Thank you for bringing your expertise to this conversation. Really grateful.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And with that, I'd actually love to wrap up today's webinar. So again, I want to thank our panelists, Louis Petrick from Longhorn Solar, Richard Nash from True Life Fellowship. I want to thank Dub Taylor again, and everyone for attending. We are at an important moment in America where our environment is in crisis, and we have the solutions, and for the first time ever, have the might of the federal government and our nation's largest investment to date directed towards deploying clean energy solutions. For the reasons we discussed today, houses of worship are primed and perfect places for this energy transition to happen. We hope the resources today were helpful. Again, I will email around a recording as well as a link to that guidance document regarding the tax credits. And if this has been helpful to you, please share it with your friends and family and others in your congregation so that we can keep solar energy growing in America. Thank you all very much. Goodbye.